Now, wait a second. If I'm going to shoot right, you want to go on the other side of the camera? I don't want to shoot toward you.
In the path of the gun, could you please move?
The inside look, just a portion of the evidence that could be presented.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear. Thoughts build up until I can't hear. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear. The thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.
Hello and a warm welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Do you remember when Alec Baldwin said this during his now infamous interview with ABC News 2 years ago in early December 2021?
Now, in this scene, I'm going to cock the gun. I said, do you want to see that? And she said, yes. So I take the gun and I start to cock the gun. I'm not going to pull the trigger. I said, do you see that? She goes, well, just cheat it down and tilt it down a little bit like that. And I cock the gun. I go, can you see that? Can you see that? Can you see that? And she says, and then I let go of the hammer of the gun and the gun goes off.
So do you notice in this version of events basically saying two things? One is that the gun went off by itself without him touching the trigger. And secondly, that it was actually Helena telling him to point the gun at her. Do you think that that is true? Now, we know one of the defense strategies from the Baldwin camp is to get the medical information regarding Helena Hutchins, because what they want to try and say is that Helena didn't die because he shot her, but because of the way that the medics treated her, and perhaps they could even argue that she had some other kind of pre-existing condition. But before we get to the rest of this analysis, if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please do. If you're enjoying this analysis, please like, share, leave a comment. Bear in mind, there's also a playlist that with over 100 episodes. So if you don't know about this case and you want a deep dive into it, go and have a look at that playlist. You can also hit the thanks button and let's get started. So, wow, one bombshell after another. In a recent filing by prosecutors in the Rust case, it's been revealed that Baldwin was offered a misdemeanor plea deal last year. But according to The Guardian, quote, to watch Mr. Baldwin's conduct on the set of Rust is to witness a man who has absolutely no control of his own emotions and absolutely no concern for how his conduct affects those around him, Morrissey wrote. Witnesses have testified that it was this exact conduct that contributed to safety compromises on set. Now, in terms of the misdemeanor plea deal, what actually happened was he was apparently offered this deal, and then the next thing they found out that he was apparently trying to produce a documentary, I guess a documentary about what had happened, and they felt that this was going to perhaps influence potential witnesses. In other words, he was going to make kind of a public spectacle of a legal case while it was still sub judice, and that the prosecutors thought was a deal breaker. So in a 32-page filing released yesterday, Prosecutor Carrie Morrissey, she was also the prosecutor who successfully prosecuted and convicted Hannah Gutierrez-Reed. She said that Baldwin would shout and swear on the set, and his uncontrolled behavior had affected safety. And we saw that. You can actually see that in clips from the, kind of behind the scenes. We saw that during Hannah's trial. According to the prosecutors, they say that they felt that Baldwin was actively pressuring material witnesses in the case to be interviewed for his documentary. So in a way, he was creating a parallel narrative to the legal narrative, while all of this is going on, which is quite incredible. According to The Guardian, Morrissey also alleged that Baldwin set about deflecting responsibility after Hutchins was killed, including by claiming that he had pulled the hammer but not the trigger on the reproduction Colt 45, contention that the prosecutor termed absurd. The prosecutor said the actor had not claimed that when he was first interviewed by police, but he had done so a month later when he went on ABC News to say, in part, that Hutchins had instructed him to point the gun at her. Now, Massa, I always knew his long verbal diarrhea interview on ABC News was going to come back to haunt him. Going back to the article, quote, every time Mr. Baldwin spoke, a different version of events emerged from his mouth, and his latest statements contradicted his previous statements, the prosecutor said. And I mean, all of this is True Crime 101. You know, if you in a situation you're being investigated, well, your statements should at least be consistent. And better to not make any statements, or if you're going to make a statement, have your lawyer present. Unfortunately for Baldwin, life isn't a movie, and in an investigation, you don't get to repeat lines until they sound just right. And that is the definition, I think, of what's wrong here. Back to the article, quote, prosecutors argue Baldwin has repeatedly changed his story about the events of the shooting, and he had absolutely no control of his own emotions on set, according to a copy of the response obtained by CNN. And one does kind of have a sense of that. You get a sense that he gets really excited and he really gets into the whole thing, that he is getting very emotional on set, but in a way that is quite surprising because it's not terribly professional. I don't think that's anything new. During Hannah's trial, as I say, we saw snippets of Baldwin running and ruling the roost of his pet project. But, you know, haven't we seen Baldwin like this before, you know, in other areas of his life? You know, if he was the big kahuna on set, no one was in any doubt about that, least of all the big kahuna himself. That's the impression one has. According to the article, quote, the filing says during his first days on set, Baldwin demanded the crew and the armorer work faster, and his relentless rushing of the crew on the movie set routinely compromised safety, routinely compromised it. In other words, the idea that safety was compromised wasn't wasn't really rocket science, wasn't really this mystery. It was something that was happening pretty much by default. It was almost like a default setting. Now, what did we say months and months ago that the bottom line was in this movie? We said that Rust's biggest problem was that it was a rush and that it should have been called Rush, not Rust. According to the article, Baldwin frequently screamed and cursed at crew members and himself, or at no one in particular on set, and had absolutely no concern for how his conduct affected those around him. Witnesses have testified that it was this exact conduct that contributed to safety compromises on set, according to the filing. Now, one can imagine that the screaming from this really important figure, this powerful figure, this potent figure, his screaming and shouting would unsettle the crew, especially a fairly green crew. And you can imagine that wasn't conducive to safety or being able to focus, to properly focus or concentrate on, for example, gun safety. Prosecutors also allege in the filing that many crew members observed Gutierrez-Reed on set to be inexperienced and overwhelmed. So many people said, wow, we could see that she was overwhelmed. We could see that she was inexperienced. Baldwin, who was a producer on the film, seemed to overlook this behavior. He had to have been aware of it, but he didn't seem to do anything about it. I think it's also important to note that, in a way, Baldwin's experience as a veteran actor could have made up for Gutierrez-Reed's inexperience had he behaved and dealt with her in a more mature fashion. The filing goes on to note the combination of Hannah Gutierrez's negligence and inexperience and Alec Baldwin's lack of concern for the safety of those around him would prove deadly for Lena Hutchins. Now, I must say, doesn't it feel as though the mystery surrounding this case was never really a mystery at all? And at last, the truth is sort of coming to the fore. Doesn't it feel that way? Prosecutors also criticized public statements made by Baldwin after the incident, accusing the actor of attempting to sway public opinion. Well, what do you think? You know, that's also known as controlling the narrative. Has Baldwin succeeded in doing that? Will he succeed in court? New Mexico prosecutors also accused Baldwin of shamelessly lying about the deadly shooting. I've got to say, having followed the case in the aftermath for weeks and weeks and months, that was my perception as well. Baldwin is due to go on trial in July to face the charge of involuntary manslaughter. Will he get a sentence similar to Hannah's? Will it be harsher or no sentence at all? I'm not going to take it further than that. Bear in mind I'm doing a live part 2 of our walkthrough of the Chair Daybell affidavit. Don't miss that. That'll be starting at around about 6 p.m. Eastern Time. I'll put a link in the description, or you can wait till the end of this video for the right link. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.